This area right here, this mountain that goes up here, I was on top of that Christmas Day, or Christmas Eve actually, between 67, 68. And we were supposed to be watching to make sure the Viet Cong didn't mortar this bridge down there.
Oh.
It was just kind of an overlook type of place.
Very nice picture.
Okay, this is that area that I mentioned about Rock City,
Yeah. Jeez.
Wow.
and that's the high end of LZ Laramie. Okay, now these are 8-inch self-propelled howitzers. Those projectiles, well, that's actually a powder can right there. And they open up the powder can, put, you know, they'll say charge 5, it'll have charge 7 in there. So you take bags 6 and 7 out and leave bags 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and put them in behind the thing, and then they figure out the data with nowadays computers. But when I was over there, we did it mostly with slide rules. They did have some computers that were called FADAC, Field Artillery Digital Computer. It was about the size of a foot locker. And the ones they've got now are about the size of a... They do basically the same thing, but like I said, they do that with computers now. These villagers were in one of the places where we went by on patrol and stopped and talked, find out, you know, what they'd seen as far as, you know, Viet Cong and so forth in the area. This guy's a guy by the name of Tom Hager. I just found him about 3 years ago, and he's been to one of our reunions.
Oh, wow.
Our unit started getting together in 1986 with 23 guys, and we've got about 600 we've got access to now.
Nice.
Wow.
And, okay. Now that's what I looked like when I was out with Delta Company, 1st the 8th as their full observer. Got an M16 PRC 25 radio. This is the short antenna on it. That would allow me to talk probably about, depending on whether I was in a valley or on the hill, anywhere between 8 and about 12 miles.
Oh, wow.
Then I had a long antenna that I could put out that would give me more range if I needed it, but most of the time I walked with that because it didn't hang up in the underbrush and stuff. This was the bedroll. It was a poncho liner, kind of a nylon, and had like polar fleece on the inside of it, and then the poncho over the top, and that was basically bedroll. Got some socks hanging out here to dry on the outside of the back. Generally, with 1st Cav, they would resupply us with food and water every other day. So we never had to carry more than 2 days' rations at one time. You know, that was not saying that we didn't, you know, sometimes wear through clothing and stuff like that, but, you know, when we call up, you know, on the radio, they would make sure that we got what we needed. Now this is on top of LCT. That's an M60 machine gun. That was like I was using in that one firefight involving that girl there, but that's not normally what I carried. I normally carried that M16.
Wow.
And now that had actually been a special forces outpost at one time in the Onlow River Valley.
Wow.
And this one is one of those things. I probably ought to be happy in that picture, but I'm not really. That was the second day I was out in the field.
Oh, wow.
And with Delta Company. And I see these little streaks running here. Okay, that's ionization streaks from a nearby explosion. I was probably about the distance from here to that chair when an explosive device went off and took one of the other guy's legs off. And that's the ionization, you know, pattern on the film from the nearby explosion.
Wow.
And at the time, I actually saw the grenade spoon, you know, the little handle skip off. There were 2 Americans and about 6 national policemen that had dug up this bunch of weapons that was in a garden.
Oh.
And they lifted it up and didn't realize there was a big block of explosives with this hand grenade
Oh.
attached to the bottom. And when they lifted it up, of course,
Thing
the
come out
handle
of it.
was
Wow.
just flew off, and I saw the handle go off, and I knocked the guy down in front of me, and both of us kind of crashed to the ground. But you know, I remember just not being able to hear for a while, and dirt and so forth flying around. But okay, other questions?
Okay, where were you when the war ended?
Okay, now, I left in 1968. The war was still going on. It continued until 1972. They had, well, actually 73. 1972, they had what they called the Christmas bombing. And during that time, the Americans used B-52s, and they actually hit some of the major targets in Vietnam at that time. They also put mines in the harbor and told the Russians and Chinese, okay, don't send any more ships because we've mined the harbor, and it's not our fault if you run into the mines.
Right.
And it took about maybe 3 weeks of that, and the North Vietnamese came back to the bargaining table and signed the treaty where we got our prisoners back. And then that that period from 1973 went to 1975, and in 1968 already I talked to a industrial management group here in Muskegon, and they said, how long is it going to take us to win the Vietnam War? And I said, we're not. And they said, what do you mean we're not? And I said, well, the Americans are starting to get tired of this war. And I said, eventually we're going to settle for an other than great arrangement to it. And then after that, the North, after the Americans pull out completely, I said, it'll probably be 2 to 3 years, and the North Vietnamese will take over the rest of the country, which is pretty much what happened. And I drew on the map where the North Vietnamese were going to come from because I'd worked, intelligence and operations. I knew what roads they were going to work because where they had people that were on their side that they knew they could get support from. So I kind of predict that was going to happen. Now, I mentioned in 1986 our unit got together for the first time with 23 guys, and it's increased since then. But it's a time that we take to honor the 399 guys from our unit that did die over there. And deaths in Vietnam were not always the real quick things. One of the guys that I took care of was Norman Eugene Treist, and he was a medic, and he'd walked into a hut, and it was a stucco type thing, and he stepped in, he put his foot down on what he just thought was dirt, but it was a board that was covered with dirt, and it had a spring-type firing device underneath with a closed electric circuit. And into the wall, there was a booby-trap 105 round that was built into that stucco. And when that went off, it literally took the lower half of him right off. And I was on the medevac helicopter that went to pick him up. I had just come back from brigade from a briefing at the time. I'd just gotten off duty, and I'd ridden with this helicopter crew for a while. Like I said, my actual job that I was supposed to do was heavy into the killing, and I wanted to be in as much of the helping people as I could.
Right.
It just kind of got to me. So I'd go out on medevac runs, whenever I had the opportunity. And we got out there, and I remembered them, bring the stretcher up to the helicopter, and they've got some things called hemostats. They look like scissors. They've got kind of jagged or little teeth on them that they use to clamp the blood vessels. And I remember looking at what that almost looked like pulled pork
Right.
with the hemostats, closing off as many of the blood vessels as possible. But he died the following day. And he was a medic. He knew how bad shape he was in at the time. And, I couldn't say, take it easy, you're going to be okay, because I knew he wasn't, and he knew he wasn't. And, but I, was laid down on the floor of the helicopter with him, and when we were coming back in, sang patriotic songs, God Bless America, some hymns and so forth. And I still have a problem singing God Bless America without tears, because
Right.
I remember that, and also in Washington, D.C., when they dedicated the Vietnam Memorial, that was one of the songs that they sang at the dedication memorial. So there's, some of those things that will always hang on.
Right.
But, we tried to do credit to the guys that served in Vietnam. Roger Knopf, who's the one that made arrangements with your teacher, he is the one that actually makes all the arrangements for the Memorial Day Parade here in Muskegon. He's the overall boss. I'm one of the people that helps him. I'm co-chairman of the Oakwood Cemetery things, so, I'm co-chairman of a bunch that puts out 1,600 flags in that cemetery. Now, they're not just guys from Vietnam and World War II and Korea. In Oakwood Cemetery, there are a lot of guys that are veterans all the way back to the Civil War. There's, right along Wood Street, there's a guy by the name of Charles Stores. It's about halfway, between, what is it, Evanston and the next one down, anyway. But, anyway, it says Major Charles Stores. Well, he was actually part of Custer's 6th Michigan Cavalry during the Civil War. And at the Battle of Gettysburg, there was a guy by the name of Wade Hampton, who was a Confederate general. He was the next Confederate officer below Jeb Stuart, as far as cavalry officers. And he was a very wealthy man when the war started, and considered to be an excellent shot with a pistol. He'd won duels and all these other kinds of things. Well, he was on horseback at this battle that's called the East Cavalry Field Battle, or sometimes the battle called Hanover Crossroads, because the road that comes to Gettysburg does come from Hanover there. And during that battle, this Wade Hampton shot a couple of guys from Custer's group, and this Charles Stores came charging up behind him with his saber out and whack, right on the head. Hampton slumped down in the saddle, all the way down to the saddle horn, kind of shook his head and turned around and came back up, pointed his pistol at Stores, and it went click. Either it was empty or it was a misfire. But because of that, Charles Stores got to die, an old gray-haired man in North Muskegon, and is buried at Oakwood Cemetery. But, those little stories about some of the graves and so forth that we decorate.
That's awesome.
And, the reason that Wade Hampton survived the saber blow was that he had a leather helmet similar to the old-fashioned leather football helmets when they were actually made of leather underneath his big forage cap. And so that blow should have killed him, but it didn't because of the leather cap he had on. But it still injured him bad enough that Robert E. Lee took him out of a command position. And for the next he was 4 weeks that they had him, basically in an ambulance wagon, and then Robert E. Lee sent him south into the Carolinas to purchase more horses for the Confederate cavalry because, he was not fit for duty yet.
Right.
But, and it was Wade Hampton and, like I said, Charles Storrs, who, came back to North Muskegon after the war. Was the guy that actually hit him over the head during that cavalry battle. And there's some more information about that in a book called Custer and His Wolverines, which is down at Hagley Public Library. They won't let you sign that out because that was a limited edition printing. And, it does have that specific stuff about a couple other people in addition to Storrs in that. But that's one thing where you can find out a lot of information about some of these battles and stuff. Is the libraries have some good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff down at Hagley Public in particular. Now, have you met Richard Duff?
Yeah.
Did you see the movie River Soldiers?
Yeah, actually I have, but I'm trying to think who.
Yeah, Mel Gibson played Lou,
Yeah.
and that played Hal Moore. Well, there was another battle that took place after that. Did he tell you about that?
Mm-mm.
There was a battle that took place the following day, and there were 155 Americans killed during that battle. And it was only took about 6.5, 7 hours. The North Vietnamese went around and actually executed the Americans that were laying there. Roger was the Air Force liaison officer there. Not with Moore, but with McDade, who was with the other battalion. And McDade had not planned very well. And Hal Moore had. Well, anyway, with McDade's poor planning, they were being overrun real quickly. And a lot of the artillery floor observers, were able to call in fire and keep them from being overrun. They also called Roger, and there was a place where there were a lot of North Vietnamese and possibly some wounded Americans on that ground. And Major Frank Henry told Roger, he said, I want an airstrike on there with napalm. And Roger said, but there might still be some wounded Americans on there. And this Major Frank Henry said, unless we kill those North Vietnamese out there on that grassy knoll, they're going to have us for the next half hour. So, Roger had to, he did what he was told. He called in an airstrike.
Had to do what he had to do.
Yeah. But, and then the part of his time in Vietnam, he flew F-4 Phantoms. I don't know what they're,
Yeah.
whether he showed you a picture of one of those or not. But, so he's a guy that's been around. He's seen a bunch of it.
Oh, I doubt it.
And, any other questions?
What is your definition of patriotism?
Well, patriotism comes from our reading of history, our country, some of the things that have been done in the past that have brought us some of our liberties and freedoms we have right now. People will go ahead and enlist in the Army for patriotism. When it gets, right down to the infantrymen fighting in the field, patriotism is probably not the word that's most important there. Is you're taking care of the other guys that you're out there with, which over a period of time you'll get to know like brothers. So it's taking care of your brothers, when you're down there in the buttons seem too thick, but it's, patriotism that kind of gets you involved in going into the service. And patriotic service also is what Roger and I do now with the Memorial Day Committee and making sure that all the veterans are honored. Let's see, 3 hours from now, he and I will be doing a service for a military veteran together, where they have the rifle salute and taps and so forth. And